Truth is making a comeback. America's Top Stories with Lisa K. Donner.
The Mueller report is now public in all its redacted glory. Volume 1 exonerates President Trump of any collusion or conspiracy with Russia. Volume 2, on the other hand, covers potential obstruction of justice. While Mr. Mueller once again was forced to admit he can't prosecute the president, he did lay out 10 examples of what might be considered obstruction of justice. A roadmap to impeachment, some say, and left the decision to proceed squarely in the hands of Congress. Have we finally come to an end of the Russia collusion narrative? Is this case closed? Or does the special counsel's wording provide a hook upon which the anti-Trump crowd can hang their hopes? Joining me now to explore the options left for the anti-Trumpers is Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, Scott Kosenzel. Welcome to True, Scott.
Thank you, Lisa.
Well, as you explained in your analysis of this report, special counsel Robert Mueller's hands were essentially tied from the very beginning by a Clinton-era Justice Department memo that prevents the prosecution of a sitting president for obstruction of justice. So, how exactly does this apply to this investigation?
This is the memo you're referring to is in support of that rule, which is a Department of Justice internal rule set by the leadership of the department that says the president is not capable of being prosecuted for obstruction of justice because to do so would violate the Constitution's prohibition on the separation of powers. Basically, the memo sets forth the reasons why then President Bill Clinton, this was a memo, Lisa, delivered to Clinton's Attorney General Janet Reno by a man who would subsequently become a Obama appointee to the federal courts. And I offer that just as evidence that it's not, a bunch of Republicans kind of making rules for a Republican president. So in any case, this rule requires that no obstruction charge against the president be brought because it would violate the separation of powers.
Okay, so the president can't face criminal obstruction charges while in the White House, but what about after his term is ended? Could the DOJ bring criminal charges against Trump later? And how might special counsel Mueller's report affect such a case?
Yeah, so as Mueller says in his report, while criminal prosecution of a sitting president is violative of current DOJ rules, the criminal investigation of a president is not. And that's how he was able to go ahead and proceed under those rules. And he was mindful and said in his report that a criminal prosecution might be brought against somebody who was president after they ceased to become president. The other thing is, Lisa, that a new leadership at the Department of Justice, a new president, a new attorney general, could change those rules. So it's not a federal law or part of our Constitution that the president can't face those obstruction charges. That's the opinion of lawyers at the Department of Justice. So that could be further tested with a different president or a different attorney general.
Okay, let's talk about the 10 episodes, as Attorney General William Barr called them, which look to you as an attorney like possible attempts at obstruction.
Well, the obstruction would come from knowing President Trump's, or before he became president, as a matter of fact, Donald J. Trump's intent for the various actions that he undertook. And then I'm not one of those people who necessarily thinks the president can be prosecuted for obstruction of justice. I think that it is the appropriate remedy if people believed he committed a crime to go ahead and proceed with what the Constitution provides, which is that Congress can then act and impeach the president or some lesser censure or something like that. But to depend on the president who controls justice, the Justice Department, who's in charge of making sure that the laws are faithfully executed, to depend on him to prosecute himself for obstruction, I think is a bit fantastic. And without knowing his intent for any of the actions described in the Mueller report, I would be hesitant to say one particular instance looks like obstruction rather than another.
But if Trump really wanted to obstruct or to put a stop to the special counsel's investigation, couldn't he I mean, we heard about the potential for him to fire Mueller, Rosenstein, or even both. If he really wanted to obstruct the investigation, was there more he could have done?
Well, there are certainly other actions that he could have taken that would have been a heavier hand in retarding that investigation. Now, whether or not that would constitute obstruction, then we'd have to go back to the obstruction analysis, which would require, Lisa, I think, knowing his intent, or casting aside the argument that a president could obstruct or couldn't obstruct. And I'm not willing to do that.
Finally, Scott, you wrote in your analysis, Robert Mueller gave a hostile Congress plenty of kindling. And we've already seen new calls for impeachment. Impeachment is, as you said before, a political decision. That said, do you think the House will initiate that process?
There's so much red meat out there, Lisa, for these attack dogs on the progressive left. I think it's going to be very difficult for those who have fanned the flames of progressive hatred against this president for 2 years now. Let's recall that they've called him literal, everything except for literally Adolf Hitler, right? He's a white supremacist. He's in favor of all these odious things. It's almost like, how could you then say, well, let's not go quite as far as impeachment? I'm not, the varsity level political analyst, but as I see those tea leaves, it seems like it's going to be quite hard for them to resist the full-on race to impeachment, and I expect that's what we'll see from the most progressive of the House members.
So in your estimation, is this Mueller report essentially mean case closed?
Well, there was never going to be a case in the first place, I think. So.
All right, so take it from there. All righty, thanks so much, Scott DiCosenza, Legal Affairs Editor for LibertyNation.com. By the way, Scott, you're looking really sharp today.
Thank you, Lisa.
Truth is making a comeback. Visit us at LibertyNation.com.